Thank you, Mukbir. My name is Ryan Dick. I'm Director of Research Policy and Development with the Egal Canada Human Rights Trust, Canada's only national charity promoting lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights through research, education, and community engagement. It's important that we begin today by recognizing that once again, the data in this Stats Canada report only tell part of the story. Some of the most vulnerable and systemically targeted members of our communities have been made completely invisible. Despite the fact the Parliament has spent over 10 years debating a bill that would add gender identity to the hate crime provisions of the Criminal Code, Canada still does not recognize crimes targeting transgender and gender variant people as hate crimes. As a result, transphobic hate crimes are vastly underreported. Police and council lack the tools they need to bring investigations through to successful prosecution, and civil society organizations such as our own lack the data that we need to design effective hate crime prevention programming and to apply for funding to support these programs. And yet we know from a handful of independent studies, such as our own National Climate Survey on homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in Canadian schools, and the TransPulse Research Project in Ontario, that our country is turning a blind eye to extremely high rates of violent, hate-motivated incidents against trans and gender variant people. 49%, almost half, of transgender youth have been sexually harassed in school within the past year. A third have been physically harassed or assaulted because of their gender expression, and over 20% of trans people in Ontario have been the targets of physical and sexual assault because they are trans. These numbers represent thousands of violent and traumatic incidents that have never been recognized for what they are: hate and bias-motivated crimes against members of our communities. The continued invisibility of trans and gender variant people in today's report, the 8th report in as many years, should be a wake-up call to legislators across the country that 10 years is too long to debate the basic human rights and protections of a community of people who face violence and discrimination, often on a daily basis. The Criminal Code must be amended to include hate crimes based on gender identity, and the Senate currently has an opportunity to right this wrong by bringing Bill C-279, the Gender Identity Bill, to a third and final reading before it breaks for the summer. Beyond the invisibility of transgender people, the data that are presented in today's report from Stats Canada are still extremely limited, rendering many more groups invisible. We see that both First Nations and Aboriginal people, as well as lesbian, gay, bisexual communities, face disproportionately high rates of violent hate crimes. Yet this report once again fails to look at the intersections between these targeted groups. We have no data in this country on the experiences that Two-Spirit people, those who identify as both LGBTQ and First Nations or Aboriginal, have with violence and discrimination. The same is true for LGBTQ people of color and people of faith. The level of analysis is essential if we are to effectively address the root causes of hate crime on a systemic and societal level. Hatred is rarely limited to one target. We must look at all forms of hatred together, rather than each one in isolation. Because unless we address the root of the problem, the hateful idea that one group of people can be set above the rest, that one set of characteristics can be considered normal and therefore superior to all others, we will never be successful in addressing any one of its symptoms. We can never fully address racism without also addressing Islamophobia. We cannot address homophobia without also addressing misogyny. But without stronger reporting from our community members and a higher level of analysis from our national statistical body, we are held back from developing the robust programming and systemic solutions that are so greatly needed. Finally, the data that we do have in today's report tell us that unfortunately not much has changed, certainly not for the LGBT community. Rates of police-reported hate crime fluctuate from year to year, but on the whole, numbers of hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation have remained approximately the same, and they remain by far the most violent in nature. We also see that it is primarily male youth under the age of 25 who are overrepresented among both the accused and the victims of hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation. The disproportionately violent nature of hate crimes against LGBT people and the concentration of offenses among school and university-age youth requires, in our opinion, a targeted approach to hate crime that begins in our education system. We need greater collaboration between community and police to ensure that police have sufficient knowledge and sensitivity to provide support to members of the LGBTQ community, and that members of the community feel safe in reporting incidents of crime to their local police services. While significant progress has been made, in particular through Gal's own police training program, we've trained over 3,000 police officers across the country in hate crime prevention. There are still far too many incidents of LGBTQ people, and trans people in particular, experiencing secondary victimization when they interact with law enforcement. We know that explicit policies that address human rights and anti-transphobia and homophobia and biphobia in schools have a significant impact, yet most schools do not have such policies. We know that these policies significantly reduce experiences of victimization, as well as the harmful effects of hate-motivated violence, such as increased risk for mental health and challenges of suicidality. Finally, we know that diversity and identity, particularly gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation, must be addressed explicitly at all levels of the curriculum. Learning about diversity and gender interaction has proved to have a positive impact on youth mental health, reducing incidents of victimization, depression, and suicidality, and increasing feelings of social acceptance and school attachment for all youth, regardless of how they identify, including, in particular, heterosexual and cisgendered youth. Thank you, and thank you to the National Council of Canadian Muslims for inviting us today.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs. My name is Amira El-Gwabi, and I'm the Human Rights Coordinator for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. We are a civil liberties and human rights organization advocating on behalf of Canadian Muslims and by extension of all Canadians. We have heard today from representatives from different diverse communities impacted by hate crimes. Like some of their fellow citizens, Canadian Muslims are often the victims of hate crimes. Hate crimes and hate incidents are manifested in various ways and levels of intensity ranging from verbal abuse like slurs and insults to threats, harassment, and finally physical violence and vandalism. The 2013 hate crimes data released by Statistics Canada today suggests that hate crime targeting religious groups accounted for 28% of all hate crimes, among which there were a doubling of the hate crimes affecting Muslim Canadians. As we have heard, these numbers, however, paint an incomplete picture. Canada's Justice Department calls unreported crimes as representing the dark figure. Canadians may be reluctant to report crimes for a variety of reasons, including further stigmatization. And according to research referenced by Statistics Canada, hate-motivated crimes are amongst the most underreported crimes in Canada, representing possibly up to 2/3 of all victimization. The people who experience such crimes or incidents don't necessarily want to report it simply because they feel various parts of shame, self-blame, a desire to remain anonymous, a fear of reprisal by the perpetrators, uncertainty about how and where to report, a distrust also of the system's ability to meaningfully address the issue. Furthermore, we also know that roughly 88% of the Muslim populations are members of visible minority groups. This suggests that religion may merge with race and ethnicity when looking at the hate crime data for Canadian Muslims. In other words, when a hate crime initially categorized as a racial one is committed against, for example, a member of an Arab Canadian community or someone wearing a turban mistaken for being Muslim, these numbers don't necessarily show in the data. Adding to the challenge of addressing the issue is the fact that police forces in smaller communities may not always have the necessary resources to accurately document the added dimension of hate-motivated bias when investigating crimes. The National Council of Canadian Muslims' most recent data for 2014 found that the number of crimes reported in 2014 actually doubled from 2013. We also noted that the number of incidents and crimes spiked during periods in which Islam and Muslims are more frequently mentioned in the public discourse in association with acts of violent extremism nationally or overseas. Some police services, including here in Ottawa, for example, act proactively. Following the tragic Ottawa shootings, for example, they connected with faith leaders to offer support should any retaliatory attacks ensue. Behind the numbers is the painful legacy that remains following such crimes and incidents. Canadian Muslim men and women have been verbally and physically assaulted on the street, they've been attacked, their institutions and businesses have been targeted. These experiences have lasting feelings of fear and hurt and impact a community's sense of safety and well-being. Ultimately, effectively challenging hate crimes and hate incidents requires a coordinated and comprehensive strategy and the input and participation of multiple stakeholders, including community leaders, law enforcement, educational institutions, governments at all levels. We join fellow Canadians of all backgrounds in calling on our elected officials to take a lead in ensuring that there is a meaningful, coordinated national, provincial, and municipal strategy for addressing this troubling phenomenon. The NCCM believes there is an urgent need for greater public awareness and education about hate crimes and hate incidents in order to both help reduce the incidence of such crimes as well as to fully address the challenge of underreporting. Accordingly, today, in our ongoing efforts to obtain a more accurate and complete picture of hate motivated incidents against Canadian Muslims and tackle some of the challenges posed by underreporting, the NCCM is pleased to announce the launch of its national awareness campaign around hate crimes and hate incidents. This campaign is comprised of a number of steps, all aimed at educating Canadian Muslims about this phenomenon as well as fellow Canadians. So, our campaign is going to include posters being sent to mosques, community centers, ethnic businesses, along with the social media campaign. We will be distributing flyers during Ramadan 2015. The social media campaign will include a hashtag, report hate, to draw awareness to this issue. And lastly, we will be launching a new interactive online map to monitor anti Muslim hate crimes and incidents as it occurs, wherever it occurs, and in whatever form it takes. This online map will also serve as a tool and resource for researchers and educators, policymakers, and politicians in the media to help provide Canadians with a more contextualized understanding of this issue. It is our hope that these tools will generate greater attention to the risk to which diverse communities are exposed and towards confronting the threat to our shared and cherished values of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. We look forward to working with our community partners standing here today on this vital issue. We all need to be part of the solution, and the NCCM is proud to be standing with fellow Canadians from various backgrounds as we launch this important initiative. Thank you.
Hi, Amanda Connolly with iPolitics.ca. I'm wondering, so these numbers obviously are a couple years old from 2013. Looking at what's happened over the past year here, specifically with regard to the notoriety that groups like ISIS have gained, do the numbers and the experiences, I guess, semi-represented here in this report still stand, do you think, in terms of the experiences of Canadian Muslims right now?
So, actually, I think that what we'll see when the 2014 data is released by Statistics Canada is a further increase of the reported hate crimes. What we have been documenting at NCCM is definitely a spike. Certainly, the media attention to what's happening overseas and has an impact. The overseas conflicts have an impact on the perceptions, misunderstanding, and misrepresentation too of Canadian Muslims and Islam. So we do see a spike around those sorts of that sort of coverage. As I mentioned earlier, in 2014, right after the Ottawa shootings, there was definitely a spike of cases reported to NCCM as well as reported in the media involving, for example, vandalism of mosques. We saw attacks on Canadian Muslim men and women who were harassed here in Ottawa. There was a car of Muslim women who were wearing the hijab, so visibly Muslim, and someone driving by on the 417 actually shot at them with a gun. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but certainly that left a lot of fear in the hearts of the community members. So certainly, we think the 2014 data will, add more information and show that there is even more, unfortunately, hate crimes and hate incidents happening in Canada.
And just unless anyone else, with regards to the narratives and the rhetoric that we see coming out from the government with regards to the need to tackle radicalization, you see it particularly in regards to the Muslim community rather than in other communities, but of course it occurs there too. How do you think that the discourse around radicalization is it helping right now, or are we at a point where it's a little bit too toxic to really confront this issue in all communities?
The discourse around radicalization is certainly something that is concerning, and it's problematic on a number of fronts. Firstly, it alienates the very communities who are on the front lines in terms of tackling this issue of radicalization towards criminal violence. It's also, as others have written, including Professor Errol Mendez, has written, that it could give legitimacy to these kinds of groups who can then point at this and say that, see, even our enemy says that what we're doing is jihad. So it could actually even serve as a recruiting tool for them. So it's problematic, it's deeply concerning, it's a trend that we hope will decrease, and we hope that our elected leaders will draw Canadians together instead of dividing them based along lines of fear.
If I can just add two quick things. And I'm glad you brought up the issue that it's actually 2015, and what we're seeing are the stats for 2013.